Okay, all right, we're gonna get started here. Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm gonna get started because I know we got a lot of baseball fans and a lot of baseball games to watch today, including the White Sox. So I'm Sheena Quinn. I'm the Senior Director of Public Relations for the Chicago White Sox. It's my honor to welcome you here today for this very special Game Changers event. This particular conversation for me is an extra special one. Every season, each year since 2008, we've had the annual Double Duty Classic here. It's a high school baseball showcase that highlights inner city youth baseball talent, but really we spend the morning talking about the impact and the legacy of the Negro Leagues. I know for me personally, I learn something new every time I hear from a group of experts sharing stories. And I'm just so happy that today, on Rube Foster's birthday, and then in a year where we are celebrating and marking 100 years since the founding of the Great Negro Leagues, that we're here today celebrating that memory and the legacy of the leagues themselves. We have a great panel today, so I'm not going to do all the talking here. I want to thank them for being with us today. I want to thank each of you for being with us today. Thank you again to our partners, everybody that's been part with us here for the Game Changer series, but also to Modelo Especial. They've been a partner and a great supporter to us throughout the Game Changer series, which is really an event series that has been intended to create spaces and forums for honest conversation, and we're grateful for all of their support. So I'm gonna wrap it up here, but I have the great pleasure today to introduce a moderator for our discussion today. I first heard her on an episode of House of L with Lawrence Holmes, talking about this incredibly fascinating story of Effa Manley, one of the few women in the Negro Leagues. And again, bias, and I just was so intrigued by the topic, and she did a wonderful job just kind of providing a window and insight into this really interesting tale. Our moderator today has done incredible in-depth research about this topic. She's a sports columnist, an avid baseball fan. She's been an advocate for diversity in sports, and her work really reflects that. She's been featured in outlets including SB Nation, Baseball Prospectus, Complex Magazine, and more. She's also the 2020 nominee for the Sabre Analytics Conference Research Award. I want to take a moment here to introduce and thank Shakia Taylor.
Thank you, Sheena. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for everyone who's attending. We're really excited about today's topic. The Negro Leagues is a topic that's dear to my heart. I feel like their legacy is underrated and underappreciated. So if you're with us today, we're definitely gonna correct that for you here. Before I throw it to our panelists to give a little introduction of themselves, I just want to remind everybody attending that you can submit questions in the chat. You just want to private message CWSPR. Get your questions. For the last 15 minutes of the hour, we'll try to take as many of them as we can. Thanks again. Larry, you want to get us started with your personal introduction?
Okay. I'm Larry Lester, president of the Greater Kansas City Black History Study Group of ASALH, founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. I'm chairman of the Sabres Negro Leagues Research Committee and CEO of Nortec Research, Inc. And we provide sports research to educational institutions, museums, corporations, libraries, and churches. And you can visit my website at larrylester42.com for more information. Anything else?
No, we can go to James. James, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is James Brunson. I'm a native Chicagoan, lifelong White Sox fan. And my most recent books on Black baseball focus in on many of the cultural aspects, particularly forms of representation as they relate to Black baseball in the 19th century, from about 1855 to 1900.
Okay. Phil, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Hi,
Hello, good morning there. Yeah,
how are you?
I am doing fantastic this morning. Um, my name is Phil Dixon. I'm a co-founder of the Negro League Baseball Museum, but been active in the whole baseball genre for over 40 years. And I'm a, let me see, I barnstormed like you wouldn't believe. Just finished a 200 city tour just a couple of years ago, and written a number of books, done baseball cards, and just an all-around great storyteller. I like to tell stories because I think people love stories. So I'm always looking for a good Negro League story if you have one.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to be here with the three of you. I've probably used some of your work as a source in something I've written, so obviously I am a fan. My first question, we're gonna go with Dr. Brunson here. You wrote 3 volumes on baseball from 1858 to 1900. Can you tell us how baseball from that era may have inspired Rube Foster?
That's a great question, and certainly I'd like to expand feedback from my fellow panelists on that topic. But one of the things as it relates to Black baseball, I think it's important to understand that while Black men and women were playing baseball as early as anyone else was in the United States, and we should also bear in mind the peculiarity of African enslavement at the time in the country, that baseball was taking place both on plantations as well as among free people living in the United States. The thing that I want to emphasize, particularly as it relates to Chicago baseball, is that there's this peculiarity. I call it baseball's hotel waiter subculture. The Black middle class, for the most part, was comprised of barbers, or what I call tonsorial artists, and hotel waiters. And the significance of both of those occupations, service occupations, is that they formed the middle class for Black America at the time. Now, in particular, as it relates to Chicago, Chicago was no different from anyone else. Immediately after the Civil War, even if not before, Black baseball players were on the scene. They worked in hotels, they worked in restaurants, and some had their own private businesses. Many were barbers, and others worked in the saloon business. Now, when we look at the saloon business and the barbering trade, particularly as it relates to Chicago, these individuals were well respected within the Black community as early as 1870, right down through 1900. And many of the individuals that contributed to Black baseball in the city of Chicago were direct inheritors of the legacy that was left behind from these pioneers in the game. Now, as it relates to Rube Foster, I'd like to turn it over again to my esteemed historian colleagues who are certainly well-versed in Rube Foster's connections with Chicago.
Okay, I guess I'm next up to bat.
It's Rube Foster's birthday, so if you're the expert, we want to hear it.
Well, I'm no expert, but I wrote probably the most comprehensive book on Rube Foster, called Rube Foster in His Time. It traces him from his birth to his death in 1930. Rube Foster was innovative and creative. He had this big baritone voice, and he was stern, and he had a large and in charge personality, an iron-fisted man, a great visionary and a game changer. And I'd say he had a Rain Man mentality, because he would take orders from his team and without writing anything down. So he was as complex as a Rubik's Cube, but his brains and influence were respected by his white peers. What makes Rube Foster so engaging is in November and December of 1919, he wrote a series of lengthy editorials under the byline of Pitfalls of Baseball. And this 4-part series talked about the operating expenses, how to manage player salaries. He gave financial breakdowns. At that time, salaries for Black ball players was probably equivalent of that of a mailman or a school teacher, so they made a good salary. But in this business model that he outlined in the Pitfalls of Baseball, he showed how it was important to work with honest men and how we could succeed if we had a league together. This 4-part series really served as a foundation for the Negro National League, which was founded the following year in February. So he was a visionary, and by laying this groundwork, he gave other team owners of independent Black teams a reason to come together in Kansas City at the Purcell YMCA and form the first all-Black league to survive a full season.
Do we know what brought Rube to Chicago?
When I think about Rube Foster, you can't really tell the story of Rube Foster without mentioning people like Saul White, who he played for at the Philadelphia Giants, or E.B. Lamar, the owner of the Cuban Ex-Giants. It's or not mentioning the Waco Yellow Jackets, was the team he played for in Texas before he came north there in 1902 with the Chicago Union Giants. And then, of course, William S. Peters. These are all Black baseball pioneers who played a role in the development of Andrew Rube Foster. And he was playing in the East. And this is how he got to Chicago. He's playing in the East, and this was in 1906, 1905. They're winning a lot of ball games, but they're not getting compensated the way that they were. Now, originally, he had come to Chicago in 1902, and then he jumped. He went out to Oswego, Michigan, and then he jumped to the Cuban Giants. And he was always looking for better opportunities and more income. And so when they couldn't get the money out East, Frank Leland made them an offer they couldn't refuse. And it was going to be the highest salaries ever paid to African-American baseball players. So they actually lured Rube Foster. He's from the Philadelphia Giants, and he brought several of his teammates with him to Chicago, to the Chicago Leland Giants. Matter of fact, I'm wearing the Leland Giants jersey right here. I don't know if you can see it. I'm cut kind of high, but yeah, and the rest was history. And Rube Foster came and as manager the second time. And really, it was the beginning of the changing of Black baseball history, because his team was so great that every African-American team in the country began to copy after the success that Rube Foster was having in Chicago. So, and then of course I might mention, they didn't play a lot of Black teams when they first came there. They were playing white teams and beating those teams right there in the city of Chicago, which had the great Chicago City League. So everybody was watching Rube Foster, and of course the rise continued all the way to the birth of the Negro National League, which is a whole different story. Oh, and then also he split with Frank Leland in 1910 after the 1910 season. Rube Foster had this was a great team in 1910, but he split, and then in 1911 he started his own team called the American Giants. And I might mention too that there were lots of baseball teams called the Giants at that time, and it was kind of a label that if you wanted to know if a Black team was playing, there's no pictures in the paper. If you heard the word Giants, then you know it's going to be a Black team. But Rube Foster wanted to be the greatest of them all. So he called his team the American Giants, which is, we belong to America. And that's just part of the legacy. So much you can say about Rube Foster.
That's so much great information. I know a lot of people here are Chicago fans. A lot of them are probably Southsiders. And one of the big things that Rube Foster did was baseball's All-Star Classic, the East-West All-Star Game. What can any of you tell us about that? That's always a super cool topic. It was held right here at Comiskey.
Ruth Foster, Gus Greenlee created the East-West All-Star Game.
Okay.
Yeah, they called him Big Red out of Pittsburgh. Ruth died in 1930, and the first East-West All-Star Game was in 1933. The brainchild of Big Red out of Pittsburgh. Interesting history there. With the Great Depression coming in, the Negro National League and the Eastern Colored League folded. And so Gus Greenlee tried to start another league, which didn't work in 1932. But in the process, he built a new ballpark, Greenlee Field, first ballpark in the country to have stadium lights 3 years before Cincinnati's Crosley Field in 1935. So America's going through depression. And there's that old saying that when there's a downturn in the economy, white America catches a cold and Black America catches pneumonia. And so he thought of a way to bring back the interest in Black baseball with the East-West All-Star Classic to be played annually in Comiskey Park. And it turned out to be very successful. One of the greatest events ever. In my opinion, it was the Masters Golf Tournament, the Indianapolis 500, the Super Bowl, the US Open that was just played, the Olympics, March Madness, and the Stanley Cup all rolled into one.
Wow.
It was the biggest sporting event in Black America. Thousands upon thousands of people came to Comiskey Park to see the East-West All-Star Game. It was the event to be seen at. And women would dress up, they would get their hair fly dyed and laid to the side.
Okay.
And the women would dress up in these ankle-length pleated skirts with a beret or a fedora on the hat on 3-inch heels.
Okay.
And if it got a little chilly, you might see them wear a little fake fox fur, you know, with the little snoot and the feet on the end. That was really popular back then. The men would dress up in 3-piece or double-breasted suits. You might see her wearing a Panama straw hat, spit shine Stacey Adams or Florsham shoes. They were really popular at the time. And one President J.B. Martin, he would come out in his all-white suit and spatted shoes. So it was men and women dressed to the nines. It was the event to be seen at. People came in from all across the country. With Chicago being a major transportation hub with Union Station, you had the Illinois Central Railroad, and for the East-West Classic, they would put on a special coach from New Orleans. It would come up through Mississippi, the western edge of Kentucky, like Paducah, all the way up to Tennessee before they got to Chicago. Then you had the Santa Fe Chief that came all the way from Los Angeles through the state of Kansas, Kansas City, St. Louis, up to Chicago. And of course, you had the New York Central train coming from Penn Station out of New York. So this is the ideal place for all of Black America to come together for the greatest event around. I mean, they were drawing in the 40s over 40 and 50,000 people.
That's incredible.
And I mean, just think about that.
Mm-hmm.
In 1941 and 1943, they drew over 50,000 fans to the game. We're talking college football type numbers.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge.
And so
go ahead.
In 1945, Major League Baseball could not put on the event because of the award. They had lost ball players like Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, Bob Feller, Stan Musial, Warren Spahn, and Ted Williams. But the Negro Leagues also lost some of their star players like Willard Home Run Brown, Jimmy Crutchfield, a great outfielder for the Chicago American Giants. One of my favorites, Connie Johnson. You got Monty Irvin and Larry Doby. Leon Day, Buck O'Neill was in the Navy at sea, Ted Strong, Globetrotter, and Monarch first baseman, and Hank Thompson. They were all in the service. But the Negro Leagues in 1945 put on an all-star game in Comiskey Park and drew over 33,000 when the rest of the Major League Baseball was shutting down. This event, in my opinion, was the most attended event except for a radio broadcast Joe Louis fight. We had to listen in on that.
Right.
So
Right.
y'all got bragging rights up there in Chicago, and deservedly so.
It's a good town. It's a great town. I mean, it's a 2 baseball team town even, which is a big deal. For anybody, any of our panelists, what do you think the preservation of Negro Leagues history can tell us about the preservation of history in America?
Wow. I like to jump in on that one.
Absolutely.
You know, I might also mention the East-West, how they came to be. In the days around the turn of the century, there were only 2 cities in America that really mattered in the baseball, and that's New York and Chicago. Every ball player was trying to get to one of those teams in New York or Chicago. And then probably starting with the Union Giants, Chicago Union Giants, that's William Peters and Frank Leland, they would lure the Cuban Giants from the East to come to the West. And so this is the origin of the East and the West. And of course, Foster jumped from the West to the East and then jumped back to the West. And so when he jumped back, now you have teams like the Philadelphia Giants who have to come west to try to take the title. And so the thing is, the East-West game that was later started, like Larry said, by Gus Greenlee, actually had its origins around the time of Rube Foster, because ball players, to get more money, they jumped from Chicago straight to New York. And then something would happen in New York, as a matter of fact, 1907, 1908, a lot of guys jumped back to the West. So that's kind of the origin that Rube Foster, the role that he would play in that. Okay, now rephrase your question one more time. I'm going to go back to that.
Okay, what do you think the preservation of Negro Leagues history can tell us about the preservation of history in America?
Well, the Negro League history shows the oppression that was occurring in America, and oppression that is still going forth today. As a matter of fact, I'm so happy to see all these Black historians on here, because without these guys, even telling the story of African-American baseball by African-Americans would be difficult. So I'm glad to see these guys and, actually out there telling the story for as long as they had. But no, it tells the story. And it tells the story not only in the major cities like Chicago or New York, but all the places that Black teams played. And, in every place that there was a number of Black people who could form a team, even in places like Salt Lake, Utah in 1909, they're winning the world's they were actually not world's championship, but state championships out in Utah. So, places that you would never expect, but Black people love this game. And it shows our perseverance. And also, watching Jackie Robinson when he came into the league, and then seeing the first Rookies of the Year award going to so many Black players. Matter of fact, in the National League, I think only two white players won the stolen base title up through the 1970s after Black players came in. So there's a great legacy there, and I'll let the other guys chime in on it.
James, you're on mute.
I can hear you.
James is still on mute.
Okay.
James, are you there?
He's trying to say something.
Hello, can you hear me?
There you are.
Okay, I guess I keep going back to mute. I don't know why that's happening unless you guys are shutting me down there.
No, we would never shut you down.
Just a couple of observations. One, as it relates to professional Black baseball in the 19th century, typically we are presented with the Cuban Giants as the first professional Black baseball team. And based on some of the research that I'm doing and continue to do, that's really just not true. Now, you know, baseball orthodoxy, I'm sure that's argued that they're the first team in Cooperstown, but we do know now that there was a Black professional team organized in 1870 in St. Louis, the St. Louis Brown Stockings. And we also know that the Chicago Uniques, while there may be some arguments for and against it, I'm for it, by the way. I think the Chicago Uniques were also a professional Black team that came along at the same time in 1871. And there is also the Chicago Gordon Baseball Club in 1884, which was a professional Black team in the Windy City as well. Now, the Uniques are significant to me because they're one of the first teams, to my knowledge, that did extensive traveling. In 1871, they played in Kansas, they played in Michigan, they played in Upper Canada, they went out east and they played in Pennsylvania, they played in Washington, D.C., and then they played in New York. And based on my research, I am unaware of any team that traveled that far during a period of about 2 months in 1871. Not even the big name teams like the Pythians and the Washington Mutuals and Alerts. They didn't travel as much as the Uniques did at that time. Now, the other crucial piece that I wanted to emphasize, and certainly it's one of these arguments that individuals might choose sides, we really don't understand as a whole the history of Black baseball and how it has been written for the 19th century. Now, certainly one of the challenges that, again, it's an orthodoxy as it relates to baseball is that somehow Black baseball in the 19th century wasn't serious, that it was comical, that it didn't have the same value, the players weren't as good. And again, I would beg to differ with that. And my primary argument against that position is no one has done any serious research on the 19th century. And it relates to how that history has been written. If you go all the way back to 1862, the reports in newspapers on the East Coast, in particular, when they talk about Black baseball teams, they refer to them as minstrels, blackface minstrels. And that is a treatment that has been perpetuated by historians up to this day. And it is totally inaccurate. And again, it's one of those topics, if somebody has a question about it when we open up for discussion, I'm more than willing to tease some of that out. But these guys were just as good as anybody else that was playing at the time. And no one has really dug in deep to try to understand what was taking place. Quick example, Frank Grant, who is a Hall of Famer. Frank Grant came out of Massachusetts and ultimately made a name for himself in Buffalo and in Connecticut. But the way this guy played the game so astonished newspaper reporters at the time is that they thought they described him as a circus performer. But the guy he made the game look easy, so an excuse needed to be made by reporters for why he was as good as he was. And we can make that argument for a lot of the players at the time, particularly the Cuban Giants, who were often referred as minstrels. But these guys weren't minstrels, they were that good. They made the game look easy.
Right on, James. James' three-volume book goes all the way back to 1858, before the Emancipation Proclamation. To answer your question, Black baseball was created out of an opportunity that did not exist in white Major League Baseball. And so these teams that James and Phil are talking about were created out of necessity. They ordered their baseballs, their Wilson baseballs, from the same company that Major League Baseball did. They wore the same uniforms, gloves from Spalding. They ordered their bats from Louisville Slugger Museum, played by the same rules. And in many cases, they put on a better quality team. This is why they had great attendance figures in the 40s, because black and white fans wanted to come out and see the magic of players like Frank Grant and so many others. They just said, there's no way these fellows are this good. So fans, black and white, flocked to the games. So the Negro Leagues were created out of a lack of opportunity. And any man darker than the shade of a dirty baseball could play in the Negro Leagues. Couldn't play in the all bleach league. So they put together a quality team. They played a more up-tempo style of play, which is made baseball a better version of itself as we see today, with hit and run, bunt and run, double steals, suicide squeeze plays. These were all part of the Negro Leagues. In 1927, they put numbers on the back of their jerseys before the Yankees and the Indians did it in 1929. They had betting helmets in the late 30s before the Brooklyn Dodgers became the first team to have protective head covering in 1941. They started Ladies' Day. They let all the ladies in the 20s. The beauty of that was they wanted to cut down on profanity and cussing and drinking by the men in the ballpark. So they let the ladies in free, and in the process, double the attendance. So the Negro Leagues were creative and innovative. That's why they had lights before Major League Baseball. They went to Japan, introduced the Japanese to how to play the game. And if you talk to Japanese historians, they say this is how we started to love black baseball. Black baseball is such a rich history that cannot be ignored. It's like one hand clapping. Come on. Can you play the piano without the black keys?
Right, you cannot.
So
I love that, Larry. There's no music without the black keys.
Yeah, so this is great history, great American history, and as Ruth Foster stated when he formed the league in 1920, he had a motto: "We are the ship, all else to sea." So if you don't want us to play with you, we'll put our own independent league together, and someday you will beg for us to come and join you. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, first of all, Larry, you are fantastic to talk to. We got about 5 minutes left before we get over to the question and answer portion of things. Do either of you have any final remarks? Is there something that you feel that everyone who wants to learn about the Negro Leagues should know? We got 5 minutes. Let me know. What do y'all think? What one thing should everybody know about the Negro Leagues?
I've got something, a story about Rube Foster. It's just a quick story.
Okay.
And Rube Foster, at the turn of the century, he's one of the greatest pitchers in America, no doubt about it. They said 1905 he won 51 games, and from my research, he probably did just that, right? But after he was winning so much, white teams began to offer him salaries to jump greater than what he was making, even with the Leland Giants, even being the highest paid black player. And he wouldn't jump. And so one of the players asked Rube, said, why won't you go? And Rube Foster said, well, as long as we're together, they can't beat us. He said, but if I was to jump and go to another team, then you wouldn't be able to beat me. He said, after a while, they won't need you, and it won't be long before they don't need me. And you think about it, that story resonates with what we're seeing in Major League Baseball today. We're not seeing the black players, and there are a lot of reasons why. But I think about what Rube Foster said, and then, of course, when Jackie Robinson came through, the cherry picking that went on in the league, they were never going to take all those players. They were going to take the best of those players and leave you to fend with whatever you could come up with, you're looking for the next Willie Mays, the next Ernie Banks, you're looking for those guys, but it was destined to be destroyed simply by cherry picking. So Rube Foster, that story always resonates with me. And I talked to his sister, Geneva, who told me that story.
That's incredible.
Well, I'd like to share one. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. I'd like to share one story about a Chicago baseball player, but I want to put it in a larger context of Black baseball in the 19th century, connecting it to the 20th century. We need to understand, too, that these players weren't landlocked. Now, they took their opportunities where they can get them, but as early as the late 1860s, early 1870s, Black players were moving across the country to play. And one of the favorite players that I have out of Chicago, don't have a picture of him, but his name is William Albert Robinson. Now, Robinson, so how is that for a Victorian name, William Albert? So William Albert began playing baseball in Chicago in the early 1880s. But we find him during summer months as early as 1881. He's playing baseball for a hotel team in Saratoga Springs, New York. He was so good that in 1883 through 1886, he's down in New Orleans playing for Black baseball teams there. And he was responsible for encouraging Black players from New Orleans to come up to Chicago to play around 1884, 85, and 86 with the Chicago Gordon Baseball Club. And William Albert, or Al Robinson, played for several Chicago teams, including the Gordons. He also played for the Chicago Unions as late as 1896, 97. So it's important for us to realize that Black players had the wanderlust as much as anybody else. And they went where they could find opportunities, especially opportunities providing for them to play baseball.
Larry, you want to close us out with a quick story you think people should know?
Perhaps not a story, but more in tune with Chicago history, Chicago American Giants. We've heard a lot about home run hitters like Josh Gibson and Willard Home Run Brown. But Chicago can boast of having some awesome home run hitters themselves in George Mule Suttles, Norman Turkey Stearns, Art Superman Pennington, and he was a Superman, and John Mule Miles. So they were equally impressive with respective home run totals during league play. So let's keep in mind that Chicago has a very rich history with the Chicago Giants, Chicago American Giants, under different ownerships. And it's just a pleasure for them to get more attention and more publicity during this pandemic. It's a tough call, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. We're gonna jump over to the questions from the attendees. The first question is for the whole panel. Given the popularity of the East-West All-Star Game and large crowds that attended, how did word of the event spread that made it the marquee event of the time? Were there special ways that it was promoted that brought so much awareness and excitement to the game?
Well, we had two major Black newspapers in the country at the time, the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. And they had ballots in the paper that people could pull out and write in their candidates. I kept track of all the ballots. Some ball players would get 50, 60, 70,000 votes. In 1942, Satchel Paige got over 230,000 votes.
Wow.
Yeah, so mail-in ballots do work. I just thought I'd throw that in for free. But you have to look at the two major Black newspapers in the country, the Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. My uncle was a Pullman porter, and he would take these newspapers and spread them around to various southern stops. And so this is how players were selected. by the fan base, not the sports writers. And it became a mega event. I hope that answers his or her question.
Yeah, I was going to add pretty much to the same thing. The black media, you know, and of course, you know, you have the two big ones, the Courier and the Defender, Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender. But also, you're going to have in St. Louis, you're going to have the Argus. You're going to, you know, you go to Kansas City, you got the Call, and all of these newspapers became like the machine, and the black media was more powerful than we ever want to give it credit for being in influencing how black people thought and reacted and moved to all kinds of situations.
James?
I think those
you
guys
wanna-
summed it up for me. I was going to say
All
the
right.
Defender and the Pittsburgh
And-
Courier.
Okay. The next question is, for someone that is interested in tracking down information about the Joliet Giants from 1907, any suggestion on how or where to start?
You said,
Go for it, James.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, that's 20th century. That's out of my league. I'll turn that over to Phil. I think he's ready to pounce on it.
Okay.
Well, I would say you might want to start off by reading some of the books that are out there on the topic to see how people have done the research in the past. And then, of course, the natural thing is to go to your local newspaper and just start at the local newspaper. That's the best place. Start with the daily newspaper in that town if they don't have an African-American newspaper, and just begin there. That's the key to starting any of these projects, because unfortunately, you're talking about 1907, there's nobody there who played for that team. You might get some descendants, but so the newspapers, I'm going to say, would be a good starting point.
And I will add that there is a website called newspaper.com, another website called Genealogy Bank. Some libraries have ProQuest. I would search those archives for a Joliet, Illinois newspaper around that period, and see if you could get access through the internet or go on site at the library in Joliet to research that team and other minor league teams.
And I would add that if you're aware of the Joliet Giants, any small towns or cities nearby, you may want to look at those newspapers as well, because if they left town, they may have been playing teams in the surrounding area, you know, within a radius of 25 to 50 miles. So I'd recommend researching some of those newspapers as well.
I think James brings up a good point, because in our research that the three of us have done, the reporters back in the day did not travel with the team. So when the team left town, there was no coverage sometimes in a local newspaper. So you'd have to go to that town to see how your team was performing on the road.
And again, another perfect example, I bring up the Chicago Uniques and the research that I did for them, particularly in 1871. Now, in the Chicago newspapers, they announced that the Uniques went on a road trip east. However, as I dug into research with teams that I thought were also prominent at the same time, whether they were in Detroit or whether they were in Lawrence, Kansas, I discovered that the Uniques had two other names. They were referred to as the Unique 10. They were also referred to as the White Stockings because they wore white stockings. So it's very important that you look at other sources at the time to try to tie together a story.
I'm gonna, this is our last question. There were so many different ballpark locations throughout Chicago in the early days of Black baseball. Can you talk about the struggles in finding a home for Negro Leagues teams? Would the Negro Leagues have lasted in another city?
I could probably jump on that one. You know, I think originally the Unions, I think they played at like, I would say maybe 37th and Butler. And so that's the Union. So we're talking about the 1800s, and James can probably tell me what he's seen on that. But there were lots of parks, but the big thing is for black baseball teams was to control your own park. And so Auburn Park later on became the park in Chicago. And of course, later on, the old White Sox Stadium, that was where Rube Foster and John Shirley began to operate out of, and it was the old White Sox Stadium over in Wentworth. So having your own field was important. And for Negro League teams, especially when Foster organized the Negro National League in 1920, I might mention too that the Negro National League has the distinction of being America's only barnstorming league. So they didn't just play in Chicago. And so you might have the Milwaukee Tigers playing the Toledo team in Chicago and playing a league game at Rube Foster's Park. Mm-hmm. So the thing, owning your own stadiums, which is something that we didn't do very successfully, but Rube Foster was able to operate his own stadium in Chicago, and it was very important. So I don't think they had that much of a problem about playing in Chicago, because if you can't get a game in Chicago, you can always go on the road with the barnstorming. So, if somebody else may want to add something on that.
Well, one of the things for me, and again in the 19th century, and I think it's important for us to understand, the whole system of leasing a ballpark to play, and most of the ballparks of any standing were owned by white organizations going back to the late 1860s. And they maintained control over these baseball grounds. And it could get to be pretty ruthless as it related to how much they would charge a black team to play there. And oftentimes for black teams, they played on what would be called the prairie. And certainly over east, when you're in Chicago, the area around what's known as Jackson Park today, the grass wasn't getting cut. That's where these guys would often play when they either didn't have the funds to lease those parks or just refuse to play. Many of the clubs, black clubs during this period in the city, those that had money, they could do what they wanted to do. And you raise the question of what do you mean by money? The Gordons, for example, from 1884 until about 1889 were most of the time on the road. They were either in Indiana, they were in Iowa, or they were in Wisconsin. And they primarily played white teams for money. And during these endeavors, they had these white organizations give them a guarantee up front, anywhere from $250 to $500, unless it was a Memorial Day or a Labor Day or Independence Day event, that determined how much they would get from those organizations. And on the side, other than those financial guarantees, many of these clubs, while we would probably cringe at it today, even though we see, I'm listening to FanDuel like crazy now on the radio advertising gambling. It's just astonishing how open it is. But in that same context, then many of these baseball teams, the Gordons in particular, and I would argue the Chicago Unions in their earliest days, these guys got their money from gambling. Not small money gambling, big money gambling. And that has to be put in the context that allowed them to rent or lease some of these ballparks when they played in the city.
Okay. Well, thank you to our panelists. Today's been great. I personally learned a lot. It was amazing to share space with you all. Sheena, you want to go ahead and close us out?
Can I give a shout out?
Of course you can, Larry.
I'd like to give a shout out to Martha Jo Black. Her father wrote the foreword to my Black Baseball's National Showcase, focusing on East-West All-Star Game. And Also a shout out to Dr. Jeremy Kroc, who's on the call, who is instrumental in our grave marker project. We put over 34 headstones on unmarked graves of Negro League players over the past 12 years. So I'm glad to see some old faces and contributors and supporters. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you guys for participating today, and Shakia for leading such an engaging conversation. We're flattered by the support and attention we received, even from some troublemakers. So I apologize for a few of the technical difficulties, but thank you all for the patience that you had. And I think we learned so much. And again, like I said in the beginning, I learned something new every day. I want to say a quick thank you again to our partners over at Modelo Especial for helping us bring these conversations to life. It's been a great morning. It's a perfect appetizer for lunch and an afternoon of baseball. So thank you guys. Thank you, Shakia. Thank you, Larry, Phil, and Dr. Brunson. I'm so happy. I'm so happy you guys were here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right, go White Sox.
That's right.
Go Royals.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.